This is Talking Hardcore, the podcast for people who love hardcore history.
You study history because it allows us to understand the present and prepare for the future.
Yeah, it's like Shakespeare or Greek tragedy.
Could you imagine what was in the Library of Alexandria?
I bet it was porn.
I'm not even wearing pants right now, Scott.
What's the old Clint Eastwood line? A man's got to know his limitations. I know my limitations.
The Talking Hardcore podcast is presented by Ace Industrial Solutions. Are you in need of skilled trade professionals for your next project? Look no further.
You want to start us off?
Yeah.
Go for it.
You're listening to Talking Hardcore with Scott
and George.
And we're talking about the Aztecs, the history of the Aztecs by was it Tom Holland?
The rest is history.
The rest is history.
Dominic Sandberg and Tom Holland. They did back in November, they did an 8-part series. Okay, and joining us today is author and frequent collaborator, Matt Bellah.
Collaborator?
Hey.
That's the right word. He's a collaborator.
I know he's a collaborator.
He collaborates. What's wrong with that word?
I think you stumbled over it.
Oh, there's a good chance I did.
You're a collaborator?
I wasn't that bad. You know what you are? An exaggerator.
Yeah, Kermit the Frog here.
Yeah. Scott's showing off his vocal ranges.
Vita asked for Kermit the Frog today.
Yeah. Okay. So the rest is history. Back in November, did a 8-part series on the fall of the Aztec Empire, starting with Cortes. And I got to tell you, Matt and I talked about it immediately, and Scott listened to it recently. It's awesome. It really does reshape the way you think about this time period in history. It's stuff that we didn't learn as kids. At least I didn't learn as a kid. And man, was it awesome.
I think that the childhood narration, like the brief synopsis was Cortes goes to Mexico, finds the Aztecs, gives them a bunch of smallpox-laden blankets.
Nope.
And then conquers the Aztecs.
Smallpox actually can't be transmitted on a blanket.
It can't?
No.
So the whole smallpox blankets thing is bullshit?
All bullshit.
Okay.
It has to be transmitted human to human.
Ah.
Yeah. So
somebody had smallpox.
Yes. But it turns out, according to the rest of history, they think it probably wasn't one of the members of Cortez's group. It was the group that came after him that joined up with Cortez after he killed their leader. They think one of those people probably had smallpox.
During these series, and it's interesting to trace the origins of that, but during this series, they continually refer to the plague that had already swept out before them, and there was a lot of culling of the population. So this is, it was not like Cortez personally, it was not intentionally by him, but it was kind of already a thing that was happening at the time.
Right. That's exactly right. So, but let's reset here. Okay. The point of this series, and the reason Matt and I and Scott wanted to talk about it, is because they took a modern look at the fall of the Aztec Empire, which started when Hernan Cortes left the island of Hispaniola and went to Mexico, which was then not actually called Mexico, right? And basically, through a series of crazy good fortune and bad luck mixed together,
exploits,
yeah, exactly. In one of the greatest adventure stories ever, conquers the Aztec Empire with a lot of help from disease.
Yep.
And the story they tell here really gives it much more well-rounded.
Yep. A lot more context.
Yes. And Matt's made some notes about a lot of the revisionist aspects of this podcast. So I'm going to go ahead and let Matt jump into those, and we'll go from there.
Cool. So we're beginning this at a time that is immediately after Columbus has basically, frankly, failed conquest. He never really made it farther to Cuba. And so the intention of this it is a fascinating story, and I'm happy to talk about it in any context. But why I believe we're bringing it to the fore is because of all this new stuff that's come out. And instead of just quoting all these books that Tom and Dominic are continually referring to, I would entreat people to listen to the series On the Rest of History and just listen to the story as they tell it. Also, pick up the books from there because there's a lot of great sources, but they do a great job of breaking it down concisely for us, and that's what we're trying to do. We were struck by the revisionist kind of aspect of this, and that's what's bringing it to the fore of our conversation, is the way I see it. There was two things just from this that like I saw knowing this story that kind of worked counter to the narrative. And one was that okay, these guys come over this place and they want gold, and they're like, hey, we have a city of gold. It's right over here. Come on and keep going. A little further in the jungle, and just letting them die of disease or whatever. And the environment, kind of the way that the Russians did to the Nazis, where they're like, General Winter is going to take care of these guys. Let's just keep them busy for a while. So you can kind of look at it through a common sense aspect like that. But there is just a ton of new stuff that's come out. It's fascinating to me. It paints it in a whole new light. But the setting of this is immediately after Columbus. And the way that Tom and Dominic frame it, it's like an entrepreneurial niche in the market. It's just a blank slate, and you have all these what they refer to as armed entrepreneurs going out there to make their way, and they're literally comparing them to the early
Facebook, Mark
Facebook
Zuckerberg, and the Winklevoss twins.
So let's just call it venture capitalism.
That's right. That's right.
The true venture capitalism.
There you go.
They're venturing out.
Yeah, we are
capitalize
on your gold stocks.
Yeah. And this is the advent of African slavery being brought to the continent, and that was done because the native population was dying off of smallpox, and so they brought in people from other parts of the world who were resistant to it. So you already had African slaves being brought in. These are the early days of colonization. This is very much an entrepreneurial, just treasure hoard waiting to be seized. And so one of the speeches Cortes gives to his guys is like, okay, when he's about to march up country, he's like, you come with me, I'm going to make you the richest men that ever crossed the sea. And that basically happened. So we have the armed entrepreneurs aspect of it, which is
the ones who lived. The rest of them died.
The ones who lived. And at the end, Dominic and Tom talk about what actually happened to these guys. They're like, these weren't good people. Let's not feel heroic about. Let's not feel happy about them. But they did receive massive land grants and their own estates, you know what I mean? But they all ended up basically suing each other because they were all petty and stuff like that. So yeah.
The ones that survived.
Kind of like
most of them died.
Yeah, kind of like you see. Kind of like you see people doing nowadays, and thinking about in the high level tech world, and thinking about this as an entrepreneurial venture is very much a good lens into it, because that's exactly what it was.
You know what was interesting in the podcast to me, and I didn't know this until the first time I listened to it, was how litigious Spain was at the time.
And the legal system, their adherence to legality, plays very important roles in this, because not only was Cortes trained as a lawyer, because he had a law background, because you had to be as a bureaucrat to move up in the world, right?
Right. Well, and that's what he was.
Right. Also, the ways in which the Spanish conquistadors continually justified to the crown and to basically the world their right to seize these lands. There was very much a legal basis and an adherence to like legal statutes or moral legality. And coming back, so they weren't just out there slaughtering people. And I'm sorry, we're jumping ahead to the end again here, but at the end there is a very much an impression that even in when they were transmitting their deeds to the crown or whoever, there was a sense that it was not cool to just go out and kill people and take their land.
Right.
Like you had to have legal justification for this stuff.
Right.
And so the intricacies of that as it worked out in the politics is very interesting, very important, and very much a focus of Tom and Dominic's revisionist telling of this story.
Right. One of the things I found interesting when I heard the story when I was younger, I don't ever think I got into great detail in it in school.
Like it was Reader's Digest version. But
yeah, basically.
That's what I remember.
Like the Cliff Notes.
Yeah.
But I don't ever remember learning about how many Mexican allies, how many indigenous allies they had. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. And Dom and Tom raised the question that I think is fair. Is like, who was using who?
Yeah.
Right. These indigenous people were under the thumb of the Aztecs, who conquered them not that long before.
Yep.
It's not like the Spanish overthrew a 1,000-year-old Eastern Roman Empire, right? This was something that was relatively recent, and they went in there and conquered the more recent conquerors.
Yeah.
But
that's correct. That's absolutely correct.
It was the Toshitlan? I'm not even going to try to get the names right.
I have it here for
awesome,
the pronunciation.
Matt. That's why I love it. Okay, so what's the allies the Spanish worked with?
The Tlaxcala.
Yeah, something like that.
Tlaxcala. Tlaxcala.
Okay, so those were the allies that they met when they first landed on shore. They fought them for a little bit, and then they're like, "Wait a minute, let's work together and crush the Aztecs," who weren't called Aztecs at the time either. So they worked together with those guys, and that's how they ended up taking down the Aztecs. Was tens of thousands of natives.
He uses that word, and it stood out to me, and I had that in my notes. So this just let me. I'm slightly remiss. Tlaxcala and Kempawalla. Okay, so those different groups, but the Tlaxcala feature most prominently, and those were the ones that I wrote down as tens of thousands. And again, we're jumping ahead to the actual siege and assault on Tenochtitlan.
Well, I mean, it started at the beginning.
Blew me away.
But that started at the beginning, Matt. Right?
It did. It absolutely did.
They started working with them pretty quick once they landed on the mainland.
They did.
Yeah.
They did, and they're like, hey, we have you like gold? Okay, here we have some gold. Yeah, but there's these people over there. They have all. So immediately you're seeing these native folks recognizing a superior military force.
Right.
They like a person which I would very much like to focus on in this episode, which is Malinche, the female translator.
Right.
We'll get to her in a minute, I hope.
Fascinating.
Only a few people had seen their ships, had seen what they represented, and knew how powerful they probably were. So they're like, hey, look at these guys. You want gold? We know some people who've got gold. They're right over there, and they're called the Aztecs. You know what I mean? Oh, by the way,
but you also
we don't like them so much.
Well, also, the plate armor, and they
crossbows,
the plate armor,
blunderbusses.
Yeah. I mean, so you had
the Toledo swords. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you had an indigenous people that had never seen anything like that.
The plated armor's huge, right?
Well, sure.
Like they had no metal.
They thought they looked like gods.
Well, that's the other thing the rest of history kind of talked about. Was like
it does, yeah.
They kind of
yeah,
break that myth that the Aztecs thought they were gods.
No, I didn't say.
No, I know.
Right.
Yeah,
but that was the common thing growing up. Was that you're taught? Well, they were predicted. The Aztecs were waiting for the return of this god, and Cortes was believed to be that. Well, none of that stuff ever gets mentioned until the mid 1600s.
No,
so literally like 150 years later. So it seems unlikely for that to actually have been true, right? Which is an interesting.
Dominic says that right off the bat. He says, like, here's the myth that the conquistadors arrived, that Montezuma surrendered his kingdom, and they thought they were gods, and that's how they start by saying that's false. So yeah, so I mean, God. I mean,
but they were
higher in technological advancement and obviously superior warriors.
If you've never seen metal, okay. The most you've ever seen is like some polished stone. And then these dudes get off a boat carrying metal cannons and guns, wearing metal breast plates, metal helmets,
shaped metal, right?
Polished up, shaped metal. Like you gotta be fuck.
Like you would working metal for your clothing the way that they would work leather. I mean, that is superior, right?
Right. I mean, that's just like, well, how do you stab them? That looks difficult.
That's
right?
it.
Like,
yeah, they were using obsidian clubs or clubs with obsidian embedded in.
Yeah, and obsidian daggers and shit.
Well,
like that.
you hit him in the head.
Right, but they wore the helmets too.
Well, they have helmets.
Still, that helmet ain't gonna do shit. You get hit in the head hard.
Big enough rock, yeah. Right, big enough rock.
So early on. Okay, so the Tlaxcala, they're like, hey, you guys are obviously the men, and we're gonna help you with your adventure. Here's some slave women. Here's 20 slave women. There was a woman named Malinche who Dominic rightly calls out as being literally one of the most important women in human history, period.
Because she speaks speaks multiple languages
not
too.
Not only because the miraculous advent of her translation abilities, which come from her background, which we'll get to in a minute, but in conjunction with the other person we'll get to in a minute. But just her guile and her motivation and her strength in these situations and her manipulation of them.
Well, remember,
make her literally having a person who transformed the world.
So remember, though, a lot of that is stuff that we're guessing at because we don't have actual real evidence.
Yeah.
That she is doing those things, but it makes sense based on her role as the only fucking translator. Right, she's the only one that speaks Tenochtitlan, speaks the Aztecs language, speaks her people's language because the Aztecs wiped out her people. So she hates them. So the real question is, how much of what Cortes does is done because he thinks it's a good idea, or how much of it is done because one, the chick he's now banging is also his only source of information because she translates everything.
And how do we not know that?
Translation, man.
Dude, for sure. Think about that, right?
Well, and her motivations were,
probably revenge. Her own prospects. Sure.
And she is one of the people who had seen the ships and knew how powerful they were. And so she was like, these guys are going to get it done. You want me to help you? So there's a scene. Okay, so let's just step back. So the Spaniards arrive, and they're trying to make their way in this new world.
Right.
And all of a sudden, there's like, hey, we have another one of your people here. And it was a guy who had been shipwrecked there, who had gone native, married into the population, spoke that local language. Okay, so now he's with them. That is pretty. I mean, that's pretty miraculous, right?
Well,
so
actually,
now they have this guy who's
right.
He speaks like a very. Go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, actually, if you remember, I don't know if that guy ended up joining them. The other guy that ended up joining them was the one who didn't go native. The guy who stayed pious. They shipwrecked.
Oh, that's right.
They shipwrecked.
Right. He said we're gonna take we're going to take off on an expedition. Do you want to come with us? One guy was like, yes. The other guy was like, no,
I've got a wife here. I've got kids. And he ended up dying fighting with those people years later as one of them. Right.
So instead of going native, learn the local language. So
because he was a prisoner there for however many years. Right.
They were slaves, yeah.
Yeah.
And so...
And he says many of his other fellow prisoners got eaten.
Absolutely.
By the other people.
He survived. So these are extraordinary circumstances to begin with, that they now have someone who is from their country who speaks the local language to a certain degree. They press forward. Now they get to a place where they're like, we can't speak. We have no idea. So this guy is like, okay, you're my translator. Go talk to them. He's like, I can't talk to them. One of the slave girls steps forward and says, I understand what he's saying. And I know how to talk to this guy. Now I can talk to them. He can talk to them, and he can talk to you. And that is how this train of translation happens. It changes the world.
And how much of that stuff is lost? How much of the communication is lost
in translation?
Like literally. Thank you. Exactly. But it's a telephone game, but you're running it through a person who has deep hatred of one of the people.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
Yes, it is.
God, wouldn't you love Dan's hot air balloon there to see what to have a chance to talk to her and the motivations?
I don't want the hot air balloon.
At this point,
I want to be on the ground.
Right.
There is a great TV series called Hernan, which is about this story, and it shows that actual moment.
Oh, that's dope. I never heard of that.
I haven't either.
Is it new or old?
It's a bit older. I'll post like a trailer for it.
Is it the one they're talking about during this series? Because they talked about an older show about this, and I wondered, but it sounded like that one was from the 70s. So,
but no. This one is newer. It's quality production. It's all foreign language. It's great, dude. I'll hook you guys.
Sweet, yeah. So, tag it in the Discord channel, please. I would love to check that out.
Cool. So then they have the march up country, and they see the Valley of Mexico, which to them is better than Rome.
Right. Well, the city of go ahead, Scott.
That TV series, Hernan. As 2019 or 2019.
Right. So not the one they were talking about in the series, because they were talking about how they watched this show growing up. So probably not the same one.
No, but
so the city, the accounts of the city of Tenochtitlan, which is where Mexico City is now, was the capital of the Aztec Empire. Man, is that fascinating, right? You think about a Bronze Age city, but like amazing.
Yeah.
And it's just such a travesty that that's lost to history. It sucks.
There's still some left.
Well, no, because it was a freaking lake, and now it's not a lake. Mexico City's built on what used to be a lake. So the city of Tenochtitlan was an island in the middle of a lake. So that when they took over the city, the Aztecs had to build ships, or not Aztecs, the Spanish built new ships to wage naval battles against this island in a fucking lake.
It's insane.
It's amazing.
Insane. 12 new ships. Yeah, they
12 new ships to conquer a city that's inland.
That is absolutely crazy, man.
Yeah. Mexico City, that was a lake, and now it's not.
Why did I get the impression I thought that was man-made.
The lake?
Yeah.
They never said that.
I thought I got the impression that was like a moat around.
Well, no, they said it was a lake and they built causeways. So they basically built bridges to get there.
Yeah.
Okay. That's how they accessed it, but it was an island in the middle of a lake.
Yeah, I thought
and I don't know what happened to make the lake gone now, but they said some parts of the bridges and stuff are still, a little bit of it is still there.
For some reason, I just got the impression that was intentional by the Aztecs.
No, I think maybe they said the people they conquered set up that city. It wasn't the Aztecs that set up Tenochtitlan. It was the people they conquered.
I mean, a hell of a place to have a city.
This was a wonderland to people who had seen Constantinople, and this speaks to your point, George, that this was a new empire, because unlike Rome, it was not an old grimy city. It was very much new and cool.
Right. It didn't have time to get that shitty aspect going.
Yeah, but good luck. I mean, how the hell
descriptions are wondrous, and it is absolutely destroyed now because of these people who happened. They did this in the course of their own lifetimes in just several years.
Mm-hmm.
It's insane.
It is crazy.
All right, so at this point we have Hernan Cortes leading an army of local allies against this city, just in a diplomatic. They're coming there as a way of greeting. They've been receiving gifts from Montezuma.
So, pause real quick, Pat. Montezuma's representatives keep sending gifts, but keep telling them, but stay here. Don't come into the city. And Cortes just keeps going further. And they keep saying, just stay here. Don't come into the city. And then eventually they still just go into the city anyway.
Yeah.
With a bunch of their allies who are ancient enemies of the Aztecs and have been paying the Aztecs
it would be like
tribute unwillingly.
Like a bunch of aliens landed in Los Angeles and were all of a sudden leading an army of Mexican nationals against the mayor. You know what I mean? Like,
no. Like marching all the way to fucking DC. Right? That's kind of what it's like.
Yeah, dude.
They landed in Iowa,
it really is.
And they're just leading a bunch of natives that don't like the government to DC.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's more like a bunch of aliens landed like right by Washington D.C. and we're leading a bunch of North Korean, like Chinese soldiers there.
Yeah, it's crazy story.
Whoa, what is going on? An obvious power, and at this point, who is using who? So we have the meeting. We have the meeting where it comes out, and King Montezuma comes out, And it's like, okay, here's the point where it says, I surrender my kingdom. I am your vassal. And they break this down. They're like,
so pause, Matt. Give a little more context. Traditionally, that's the way the story was told.
Yeah.
That Montezuma, this is the way the Spanish told the story. That Montezuma said this to Cortes at the time. And Cortes is the one that tells the story.
For legalistic reasons.
Exactly.
For legalistic reasons.
Right. That Montezuma said, I surrender my kingdom to you, and I am your vassal of Charles V. Was it fifth? I think it was fifth. That's when that's the way the Spanish always held the way that first meeting went.
Yep.
Right. But we don't have a lot of other sources for the way the meeting actually went.
Like I said, primarily for legalistic reasons, so they could.
That's the way you would definitely tell your king it happened to justify everything that you're doing.
Especially when you're only in that city because you violated your orders. So the guy who sent him, Vasquez from Cuba, said, don't go inland. Literally, he had orders not to go conquering.
And he did anyway.
Cortes. Orders, don't go conquering. Yep.
That's right. Yeah, I had that in my notes, and I skipped past it there. So they did found a city, and then Cortes he relinquished his current position, and he took a legal role.
Yeah.
They were like, let's found a city, let's vote on the town council right now. You. Cortes took a legal role, which would protect him from prosecution.
He found a loophole to get out of being in trouble for violating his orders.
That's right.
So the loophole was to resign his commission as captain of the expedition.
Yes.
Okay,
yes,
so
sir.
he did that.
Yep.
And instead, then he established a new town where he was elected head of the town, and the city council voted for them to go ahead and do what he wanted to do. That was against the orders of his expedition. So he did a legal loophole by creating a new town. And that town is still there.
Yeah.
How crazy is that? You can go to these fucking cities right now and see shit that was built not long after this happened.
Yeah.
In America, everything is so new. Even in Mexico, shit's older. Like, you can go see stuff that's the 1500s, 1520s that were built by the Spanish after this. Like, nothing left here, man. Some ruins.
And there's tragic history behind it. And it's the legal basis for all this happening. And another thing that Tom and Dominic start this out with is like, Cortes was reading stories about Alexander the Great, and it's very much a heroic adventure. But back at that time, you could just go conquer and slaughter and claim it in the name of Achilles and glory or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But in this time, you had to have the law on your side.
In Spain, you had to at least have some kind of somewhat legal justification.
Yep. Which is strange, because you wouldn't think that was the case.
Because they all acted like they didn't need it.
Yeah.
If you look at the big picture.
And it's a very important point of this revision that's coming out from all these books, and it's a major standpoint of this entire conversation to me.
But we don't need to go through the whole history here, because I want people to go listen to this series.
No.
And so maybe we're doing a little bit too much of a timeline dive.
Well,
please, if you haven't listened to this, go listen to this and then come back and hear what we're going to say.
Well, we skipped like the first 3 episodes, basically, that talks about Hernan Cortes from Spain to Hispaniola to it's like his clerk position there.
I can sum that up. It was a violent time. He grew up in a really violent part of Spain. And so most of these conquistadors did. So when they went and did violence in Mexico and in South America, it was just more of the same shit they were always doing.
Yeah.
And that doesn't excuse it, but man, that's just the way it is.
Let's take a
I was more referring to Cortez's resume.
Sure. He was a notary. I like to point out that I'm a notary. He was almost a lawyer, they said. They didn't say he was a lawyer, but
he was a paralegal.
I think basically notary back then in Spain was kind of like a lawyer.
Or paralegal.
But I'm a notary and a lawyer, so it's like, basically, I could go conquer people.
Yeah, but he was like a clerk.
Who should I conquer?
He was more of a paralegal, if you think about it.
You know what? He's a clerk. But you know who I'd like to conquer? Canada. I feel like I can conquer Canada as easily as he conquered. Because it's easy. They would be so easy. It's so empty. It's so empty.
I think you're so wrong.
No, Canada would be simple. Dude, there's 30 million people.
All right. Well,
That's a joke.
When we
I laugh at that.
when we get towards the end of this, or
Yeah.
after, I'll tell you why you don't want to.
Yeah, I could take him.
No.
You ever seen the movie Canadian Bacon? John Candy conquers the country with like a gun.
You're not going to take Canada.
I know. I need some help.
You're not some.
Some
I
help.
need like 20 guys.
So
Yeah, 20 guys.
I'm on
Couple of rednecks.
I'm on episode 4 in my notes here, so we're already halfway through.
Oh,
Okay.
gotcha. All right. Sorry, Matt.
Okay,
I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I like that Matt's
No,
keeping
that
us
was
on
great. That
track
was
too.
great.
This is good. He does the
Yeah.
homework for us, so
So-
we can just listen and talk about our ideas. Matt, we appreciate you, buddy.
Right on, man.
Have a big drink of wine, though. I
So,
think you
yeah,
need to have a big chug of wine. Social.
Drink.
If you're listening at home, take a drink. Unless you're driving.
Well, then drink water or Coke, whatever's in your cup.
Matt's got a nice boxed wine.
Yeah,
Vintage.
it's a Boda Box Pinot Noir. Not a sponsor of this podcast, but a free shout out.
But hey, Boda Box, if you want to sponsor the podcast, let us know.
Actually, my rum should sponsor this podcast. Diplomatico.
Those bougie asses don't want anything to do with us. We're more of a box wine kind of sponsor than a Diplomatico.
Yeah, we are.
Matt holds out the box. He's like, vintage, April 2023. All right.
Yeah, he's like, I bought this that year and I've aged it another year. Right in that plastic bag.
No box of wine lasts a year in my house.
I know.
I'll tell you that right now.
That's awesome.
I have a rule, Matt.
All right,
I
so-
mean, I have a rule though. Once the bottle's open, it's gone. There's no recorking it. You just drink it.
Cool.
That's it.
So
Anyway.
on that note, I'm going to go get a refill and
I love it,
the
Matt.
next, I'm gonna let you guys talk about this. So here, the next note I have is after meeting Montezuma, they check out his city. They go into the temple where all the human sacrifice stuff is at, and that
Right.
is horrifying to them, but is also a depiction of their own notions of biblical propaganda.
Okay.
Be right back.
So what you're saying is, what Matt's talking about is, when they meet Montezuma, after they're there for a little bit, he takes them in and introduces them to his God. He takes them into the temple and shows them their idols. And Cortes and his men are horrified because they basically look like demons.
Yeah.
They're half serpent people. It's very Old Testament Bible, sounds like the devil descriptions.
Sure.
And Cortes, not only, he doesn't even just, he says that to the guy. He's like, in the temple, he says, you're worshiping demons. These are the bad guys. You need to worship our guy.
Yeah.
And imagine having the balls to say that to this guy who's the emperor of everybody you're around and could just kill you. And you see all this blood everywhere that's evidence of human sacrifices.
Yeah. Except
And he's just like the nuts on that guy.
well, except you have like an army of 10 to 20,000.
Yeah, but they're not in that temple.
I know.
That's what he talks about. Okay, so that takes us to the other question. But we'll get there. To have the balls to say that when you're in the temple looking at these guys where they sacrifice humans and be like, yeah, you're worshiping the devil. Cortes, he was not a pussy.
No.
Like,
Of course not.
Whatever you're going to
Straight
say
up.
about the guy, not a pussy. And probably pretty pious. Like, because I'd be honest, if I'm in a temple and I'm seeing all these like devil guys and stuff, I'm gonna be like, hey, they look pretty cool. I'm not gonna insult the guy. But yeah, that's a good idea. You should worship him. And then when I leave, I'm like, whoa.
Well, how do you know the translation?
Like they're seeing the images. They're seeing the images.
I know, but the translator might have, sugar.
Right, but they're seeing the images of guys with serpent heads and hooked, cloven foot.
Yeah.
They're seeing shit that's literally described in the Bible as demons.
I gotcha.
Like,
There were
to guys who were literally
there's
pious.
A statue glued together with human blood.
Right, okay. In a world in the 1500s where people took what the Bible said as not allegory, but fact,
Yeah.
and then you see these people worshiping things that are described there as demons, you got to be like, holy shit, I'm in the realm of Satan. That's what you would think, right? You would think, if I can convert these people to Jesus, I'm doing the Lord's work. And if I get rich, okay, but literally, like, think about that. If you truly believe in the gospel, and then you meet these people who sacrifice humans and worship devil idols, what wouldn't you do to convert them?
Well,
It's very fascinating to think about.
but you got to get back. Let me just ask. I'm going to do like a little revisionist history here. What if the translator, when Cortez is all like, "You're worshiping demons, the bad guys,"
Right.
like, what the hell's wrong with you? And the translator goes, "Yeah, I'm not going to say that because I'm going to be the first person to get killed."
Well,
so they're
if you remember in the podcast, because that makes sense, but Montezuma got super offended by what Cortez said.
Sure.
And sent them down and then had to stay up there and do penance for their blasphemy.
But that doesn't mean it wasn't sugar-coated.
Sure, I'm sure it was.
So it pissed
Listen,
off.
if you're the translator, you're not going to say some shit that's going to get your head chopped off.
Exactly.
No,
you're going to get your heart cut out right there. And
you're right. You're going to be like, he said he thinks that maybe you might be wrong.
Yeah.
That's how you would do that.
Exactly.
But remember, he actually stayed up there to do penance for their blasphemy.
Yep.
According to the sources.
Sure.
So even if he sugarcoated it, that's ballsy.
Well, it's better than
ballsy.
And Tom and Dominic break down that point too, to like maybe it's an interpretation, and also if you're reporting back, I mean, I don't think we need. If you're reporting back, you would depict the most horrific stuff that you could to depict these people as, you know, Satan,
barbarians, savages, devil worshippers.
Right.
But they do also make the point that somebody, at least one of these gods, is still worshipped today. So there's historical evidence for this kind of stuff. So
which is fascinating to think about too, right?
It is. It really is, and it speaks to a further point where like parts of these regions were untouched by the conquering until way later on. But also we do know that they were cutting people's hearts out and sacrificing them to the gods and stuff. So it's not that big. So at this point, let's take a look at Montezuma. This guy, he liked a zoo. He liked a good zoo.
That was a fascinating thing too. Okay, go for it, Matt. Fire away.
So he kept a zoo of strange creatures from around the world, his world, the extent of what that meant to him at the time.
Pause.
And these people might have been considered nothing more than new exhibits to
the point where he not only creatures from the local area. There's other reports from other conquistadors that he had a buffalo, which would be up from the plains. It would be up from at least as north as Texas. Oklahoma.
Not impossible. Not
impossible at all.
Really
and so, because when those conquistadors, when they made it up there, they saw buffalo for the first time since people had seen them in Tenochtitlan. So, that zoo was really very vast. Like, we think of the Native American tribes much differently than what they really were like, where they were trading all over the place.
Yeah.
Right? They were trading all over the place. So he was able to have in his zoo all these exotic animals from all over North and South America, including a buffalo. All right. So somebody was able to catch that buffalo and bring it down there, probably as a calf, but where they raised it, and he kept it in his zoo. So what Matt was alluding to is Dominic and Tom were talking about how there's a theory that maybe he was. So when Cortes and his men get to Tenochtitlan in New Mexico City, they spend a lot of time in the palace with Montezuma, and they tell the Spanish that Montezuma was their captive.
Yeah.
But recent history tends to suggest that maybe really they were the captive of Montezuma.
A little bit of column A, a little bit of column B.
And it might literally been that. They both thought that, right?
Might
literally been that. But they raised the point, he had this big zoo, and in that zoo was not just people, or not just animals, but he also had weirdly shaped people.
Yeah.
So maybe he would be like, look at these gringos. I got these white guys. Like, I got a midget. I got a humpback. I got all these weirdos.
Got a bearded lady.
Yeah, I got a bearded lady. And I got a white guy.
He had the freak show.
Right. They're part of the freak show.
There you go. The strong man.
At least that's one possible theory.
Could you imagine that? He had a guy like, I don't know, Hap Thor, just kind of hanging out, lifting rocks all day.
Right. I mean, listen, if you're an emperor, sometimes you get bored.
Yeah.
You're like, well, let me see some shit. There was no cable.
I want to see, yeah.
There's no cable.
Totally,
There's
man.
no
That's how you have to do
Netflix.
it.
So you got to import all your entertainment. No.
Yeah.
You don't get to just flip it on when you're bored.
At this point, it is, ambiguous, and so ostensibly they take the emperor into custody. But Tom and Dominic raised the point that, like, would all of the citizens of this city have just continued to react complacently had their emperor been taken into custody? Probably not. So that speaks to your point that, like, it was kind of the other way, or at least not that. But eventually the emperor is taken into custody. And then that's when we get to the invasion with Cortes building the ships. And it shows...
No, you're skipping over a little bit. Sorry, let's get a little bit.
Yeah, go ahead. All right, yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to do this quick, okay? So really quick. While they're in Mexico City, in Tenochtitlan, hanging out with Montezuma, they get word that some more Spanish have landed and are in Spanish that are mad at Cortes.
Yeah,
right. Vasquez, the guy who sent Cortes and whose orders Cortes is violating, Vasquez, thank you, sent 1,000 more soldiers.
Yeah.
So Cortes leaves some guys there who basically kidnap Montezuma and hold him hostage, now officially. And he goes with 80 men, he leaves 80 men there, takes the rest of his 400 people back to the coast through subterfuge. Thank you. Through subterfuge, manages to kill the commander in charge of those 1,000 men and then turn them to his cause.
Yep.
Rushes back to Tenochtitlan, gets into the city, maybe because they let him so they could capture him. And now he's trapped inside the palace with Montezuma and all his other men, while all these Aztecs are outside outside of the palace in the city and suspicious of them.
Yeah.
Then they break out on the Night of Tears, isn't that what it's called? Where a bunch of the Spanish die in an ambush on all these bridges.
Yeah.
And they lose a lot of their treasure and all that. But Cortes survives. He's seen crying until he remembers that, wait a minute, we had the shipbuilder.
Yes.
He says, is the shipbuilder alive? And they said, yeah, he's alive. He's hurt, but he's alive. And he goes, then we have everything we need. So he goes back to the Tlaxcala and uses the Tlaxcala to help Tlaxcala. Tlaxcala? That doesn't sound right.
Tlaxcala, yeah.
Tlaxcala uses them to help him build ships, and now they start basically using all these allies that don't like the Aztecs to fight all their little towns outside, and then work their way into the lake where they have naval battles.
Yeah,
on a lake. All right, naval battles to assault a city on an island in the middle of a lake.
And how big were these boats?
I'd love to know that. They made 12. But I'd love to know how big the lake was.
No, that's fair.
Because some lakes, we're from Michigan. Lakes here are bigger
giant
than most people's lakes. Right? So is this a big lake? Is this a regular lake?
Side note, I just read that the Lake Superior is like an inland ocean.
Basically.
Yeah.
But it's freshwater, so it's a lake.
But they don't call it. It's big enough to.
It's still Lake Superior.
But they don't. Anyway, back to the.
It's not Ocean Superior.
I'm just telling.
Sea of Superior.
I'm just telling you.
Anyway,
maybe it's an inland sea is what they call it.
Yes, but it's Lake Superior.
Anyway,
so they assault the city with ships.
Yep. Don't know how big.
Inland. Don't know how big the ships are. Don't know how big the lake is.
Are they rowboats?
But it can't be that big of a lake because they had bridges.
Yeah.
So you wonder the size, but the city was around 50,000 people, they think. Okay, at the time of the first time the Spanish. Meanwhile, sorry, we got to go back. Meanwhile, while they're building these ships, a bunch of people in Tenochtitlan are dying from smallpox.
Yep.
Which makes their conquest much easier. But also a bunch of their allies are dying from smallpox.
Which is going to make
makes it a little more difficult. Yeah. But also, more Spanish people are showing up because the gold they sent back to Spain has turned up, and they're like, "Oh shit!" So that turns on all the people coming over in boats to help.
Yeah.
So his numbers are swelling with Spanish. The locals are dying off in both the allies and the enemies.
Yep.
And all that sets up the siege of Tenochtitlan via boat.
And then Montezuma's killed.
No, Montezuma had already died. He died when they left before the Night of Tears.
It's an incredible story.
It's a fucking crazy story.
And then Montezuma's son
It really is.
assumed the role.
And then he died within 80 days of smallpox.
Yeah.
And then Montezuma's cousin took over, and he did good until Cortes beat him.
Well, they tortured him, yeah.
And then they tortured him to find out where the gold was.
Yeah.
They poured oil on his feet and lit it on fire.
Yeah, that's fucked up.
Yeah. And I posted a quote in the Discord today where Tom says, "You can't trudge if your feet have been burned."
Right. Right. Because then he takes him on a trip with him to go try to find this other dude who fucked him. Cortez gets screwed over by another conquistador, and he goes to try to fight him.
Yeah.
So let's stick with the siege for a second because I got a couple notes there.
Sure.
So there are Spanish captives, taken. And during this time, just imagine this scene. You have this mythical city. And you're besieging it with your allies, and there's disease going on, and their god is literally a demon to you. And so you are now engaged in
holy war
endeavor that is a huge gamble for your own personal life, for your men, but with the physical and spiritual consequences of an epic battle of heaven and earth. And so captives were taken, and during the night they hear the drums.
Oh, right. Okay, so this is in the middle of the siege. Cortez does a rush against one of the bridges, and they make it into the city, and they get ambushed, and like 50 of the Spanish are taken hostage. And the rest of the Spanish retreat. Go ahead, Matt. I'm just setting the stage.
And they see their friends, their comrades, people with whom they have fought, their countrymen, being sacrificed at these temples.
Up on the hill as dawn breaks.
Yeah.
They're sacrificing these dudes that they just got caught. And they're ripping, what they said is they ripped their beating hearts out. Yep. Seems like a shitty way to go. They stripped them naked and hauled them up to the temple.
During this time, there's a lot of mixing of forces. So some of the the Aztecs capture Spanish weapons like the crossbows, but they just can't figure out how to use them.
Right.
But also the Spanish are running out of gunpowder, and they figure out a way to lower themselves into the volcano that is right there. We haven't mentioned the volcano. There's a volcano right there.
Two volcanoes. Yep.
And and they figure out a way to lower themselves into the volcano
to get saltpeter,
niter or sulfur. To get saltpeter to make gunpowder on the spot. Just imagine that.
Yep, ballsy. People had to be ballsy to do this. They're fighting a holy war, though, right? Like that's the way they look at it.
Insane.
It is crazy.
And so, in that moment, when the Spanish are starting to win, they're actually winning with their allies. So they bust out their big nuclear option, which is bringing out a man dressed as an owl.
Yes. Okay. So the Aztecs are under siege for a month. Okay, they're all starving. The Spanish aren't letting any food in, as one does in a siege. And they keep making further and further into the city. And the Aztecs throw a Hail Mary, right? They know they're screwed. They're not going to win. So they bust out the big guns. And they bring out a guy dressed as their god, Quetzalcoatl.
Yep.
He's dressed as an owl with all these. It's a suit with a bunch of blue and gold and white feathers attached that they only normally use when they're winning. And they bring it out as like, oh, you're fucked kind of move. But here they're screwed. So they bring this out, and this guy's dancing around on rooftops and stuff. And then the Spanish just shoot him, which is a very Indiana Jones move where he's, that's where
the guy comes out with the sword.
And then he just shoots him.
Yeah.
But they got this guy that's their Hail Mary. This guy is strong juju. He's got the feathers. He's got the whole look. It should scare the shit out of more normal Aztecs, but these guys don't have the context. Yeah. They don't know that this is supposed to be scary.
Right.
This isn't the Aztecs would probably, the other people that they would normally use to fighting would probably think, hey, this is some kind of demon ritual. I better get the hell out of here.
Well, that's what
but the Aztecs are like, oh, look at this goofy clown. I'm going to shoot him.
No, the Spanish.
The Spanish.
It's a demon. Shoot it.
Yeah, maybe that's what they thought. Shoot that demon.
And he dies.
And long story short, it did not work.
It sets the power. Yeah. It sets the power structure like very clearly. Like, we are religious people, and these are our powerful allies, and they have absolutely no effect against your gunpowder and bullets.
Right. Turns out demons lose to bullets.
I was just thinking of the vampire movies where they're like putting a cross on the bullet or whatever.
Hey man, I would not be shocked if those guys were doing that.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Would you be shocked to find out that they had dipped their freaking bullets in holy water? Would not surprise me at all.
Bring out the special weapon.
Yep. Yeah, they roll out their one gun that they have that's got the holy water dipped silver bullets, and they shoot the owl guy and like, it worked!
Yeah.
Holy shit! We shot a demon!
A super soaker with some holy water in it.
There you go. There you go. Anyway, and we make light because this is what we do here. It's fun. But holy shit, this story is crazy. You're never going to see the likes of it again in human history. Unless we start meeting aliens. Because that's it. This is really like a completely aliens encountering a new species almost. And you're never going to see that here on our planet again. It just won't happen.
My book, Pax Humana.
Right. Which you could envision it then, but until they make it a movie, you're never going to see it.
So, it depends.
So at the what do you mean?
If
civilization breaks down and we get back to stuff again and forget.
There you go. Yeah. And it'll only take like 150, 200 years and everybody will forget what the hell, who built the skyscrapers and, just like in.
I think you're right.
I don't buy it.
Oh, look at the Medes.
I don't buy it.
People didn't even know what the hell this huge, massive.
Look at how little they knew about shit compared to what we know.
George?
And how well. Okay, so how many people knew how to read in that time period?
Wait a minute.
Pause. Think about this for a second, right? The literacy. So if you only have like a small percentage of the population, say 5 or 10% that know how to write shit down, it's easy to forget stuff a lot faster. Maybe. Here, if we have some kind of collapse, at least in the civilized, in the first world, 90% of the people could write shit down.
This generation, 2 generations down the line, maybe nobody can read or write.
Seems unlikely to lose that fast.
I don't think so.
I do.
What's important? It's not.
It is going to be important.
Importance isn't reading or writing.
No, you're wrong.
It's how to plant crops
100%
and
wrong.
survive.
Because where do you learn that shit? You read it. You read it.
Or somebody told you how to do it.
But it's so much better if you can look at a book
I'm just
and read it. Read how to make a battery and read how to make a solar panel and read all that shit.
If you don't have the equipment and the materials, it goes away quick.
You would find it pretty fast. It's beside the point.
But anyway, what do you think, Matt? How long do you think that would last? I'd say 200 years, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, at the most. People forget.
We'd be reconnected before they had time to forget.
You never know.
It depends on the level of the destruction.
That's what it depends on. If there's 50 people left, if there's 50,000 people left, maybe. But if it
comes down to
if it's a couple million, even
what we remember about ourselves.
Right. But it doesn't need to be oral if 90% of the people can read. Right? Because then even if the people, if we lost the digital stuff, the people who are left would write shit down. Right? They would write it down.
If they had time to.
They would write it down.
Or it would be contested. It would be from their perspective.
Sure.
It would be.
But they would write it down.
Unless they're starving.
History. his history can be controlled and used and weaponized to create a new generation to a new motivation, or just confused.
But even if they're starving, Scott,
and that's the whole point of this
you'd
series.
have time at night.
The rest of the series, history was confused, and it brings me to my ending notes here, which is that the Spanish really did have unease with aggressive warfare,
right?
Conquering kingdoms based on bloodshed only and conquest was not okay to them. There is a fiction there, there might have been a fiction about the whole surrender of the Aztecs, and that ruthless land grabs were not seen as kosher by their kings, and so there needed to be a legal pretext for all of it, which sets the stage for this entire narrative of which we are all, or with which we are all so comfortable.
Right, and to be fair, that's something that in history, it's tough, right? Because the Aztecs had just conquered that land. This reminds me of the Rest is History podcast. They just did a series about Custer, okay? And he lost to the Lakota.
Yeah.
And we think about it like, oh, these were people who were, this was their ancient land. Well, no, the Lakota conquered that 15 years before.
Yeah.
Okay, 15 years before they lost it to the Americans, they had conquered it. And who did they conquer? Who are the people who conquered it from before that? Whether or not we want to admit it, human history is conquering. And I appreciate that we try to not do that anymore. I think that's good. I am in favor of that. Okay?
Yeah.
I am, because it's safer for everybody. But to pretend like these guys were bad because they conquered, I don't believe it.
No.
That's just how all of human history worked. And in almost all of nature. Look at other predators, right? They conquer each other. They conquer each other's territory. They fight each other for territory. You know who kills the most wolves? What wolves mostly die from? Is
other wolves.
Other wolves.
Yeah.
Fighting over territory. It's not bears. It's not mountain lions. It's wolves.
Yeah. Well, it's the same thing with. Well, all right. It's the same thing with, like, let's just say deer or moose. They're all competition. It's all competition.
Right.
I understand, right. but it's all competition for mates, for food, for resources. I mean, even though they're prey, those are big ass animals.
But it's. I just think wolves are especially analogous to us because of their social nature.
Sure.
And the fact that they're predators. So it's a good species to look at. Like, you could look at bears too. They fight each other, but they're not social.
Yeah.
So it's a little different. But you look at nature and it's all competition and fighting and conquering. That's how you win the resources so you can get the best mates, is you conquer your rival. Okay? So Tom Holland always talks about this, and he talks about it a lot in this podcast. Those of us now who look at that and see it as a bad thing, it's a very Christian way to think about things.
Yep.
And I think he's right to point that out. Where that comes from is a very Christian perspective of we shouldn't just conquer to conquer. People have inalienable rights to their land, things like that. That is something that for most of human history was not anything considered to be true. It was the right of the conquest.
Yeah.
Alexander did not feel bad about taking the shit he took.
Of course not.
Right? He just didn't. Caesar didn't either. You just did it because you could, because you were strong enough.
Yeah.
Christianity kind of comes along and teaches, well, you shouldn't conquer people just because they're weak. The weak shall inherit the earth. That's the thing, right?
Well, back to your animal analogy, a quote came up to mind. I don't remember who said it. But no animal in the wild or in the wilderness dies from natural, from old age. They all die from tooth and claw.
Or their teeth wear out and they starve to death.
Well,
right. Like, that's a thing too. But you're right. It's nature's metal.
Yeah.
Right? It's a real true statement. Nature's metal. And to consider ourselves not part of nature is a folly.
Well, we've talked about this before in other podcasts. We've distanced ourselves from slaughtering, from harvesting our own food.
Right.
You know, and that's where a lot of this comes from. That's where a lot of this sentiment stems from. Is we're so
far removed from nature.
I was going to say dislocated, but
Disassociated.
Disassociated, yeah, from how things actually are. Like I said, if we went to nothing tomorrow, guess what? We'd all have to start butchering our own food. I mean, our own animals, if we're going to eat animals.
And people will get used to it again pretty quick.
Sure,
people aren't going to starve to death because
that
they
I would
want to
agree
do
with.
it. They will get used to that quick, but it does. You're seeing death then.
Yep.
And now we don't see death the way we used to. We don't see death in our food.
No.
But that's used to be everything you ate. You saw as death first.
Yep.
Right? Now, most people don't have any concept of how the food they ate died. Right? And they don't want to think about it.
Or care.
Yeah, they don't want to think about it. But that allows you to be a lot more sensitive.
Sure.
About death. And a lot more sensitive to all kinds of things. And empathetic, maybe, is the other thing that allows you to be.
All right, so let's circle back. Sure. Matt, what else did you have to offer? What else did you have on your
Get back on topic.
I like you, Scott. Look at you today. Hey, I just,
getting us off a tangent today. I like it.
We're getting off that tangent.
All right, good job, Scott.
We can recap that.
Good job.
So following the conquest of the Aztecs, Cortes was a king, and his wife, who Velasquez had forced him to marry when they landed in this new settlement, came to visit him and saw that he had already taken a mistress who was pregnant, and probably gave him a lot of guff about that. And Cortes didn't like it, and she unexpectedly died, and Cortes probably killed his wife.
He woke up the whole palace in the middle of the night. My wife has died. She must have what was it?
She slipped and fell on that night.
It was something like it was
30 times.
I knew she had a weak constitution. She must have had a fright.
Yeah. Sure, right. It was you standing over.
Strangling her.
Yeah. I said, she fell on that night 30 times. Yeah.
Not a good person, but he made his own way in the world.
Listen,
the other
legit,
thing I have
nobody thinks he was a good dude, right?
No. And let's bring this back to Columbus, who, we were talking about people being a product of their times and violent times. Columbus was ordered by the Queen of Spain not to take slaves. He did it on multiple occasions. This guy also disobeyed orders and went up country, so that kind of thing is going on.
Well, he also
be a product of your times.
The Spanish didn't want to fund his expedition, so he went to the Portuguese, and they.
I think you did you did it backwards.
Oh, was it?
The Portuguese didn't want to spend it.
And then he went to Spain, and then they funded it. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Damn.
And I've heard, actually, just at a wild tangent here, that because of Julius Caesar's occupation of Spain as governor in his early political career, when he milked that province for as much gold as possible, that's what led to the dearth of precious metals in the region that caused Spain to be so greedy for gold.
Huh. Interesting.
Well, Tom and Dominic kind of talk about that a little bit too, why they wanted gold. And it makes a lot more sense if you think about it like this, right? But why specifically, if you're on a ship, if you got to a place by a ship, you're not going to bring back a bunch of wheat. You're not going to bring back a bunch of farm animals. That's not going to be near as profitable.
We got that.
By weight, gold is easily, like they said, easily divisible and easily transportable.
Pound, divisible, yes.
That's why gold. It wasn't like they were specifically gold hungry in general.
No.
It was that gold made the most sense.
Most valuable thing.
It made the most sense.
You're right. And they bring that up. They bring that up a lot. Yep.
Yeah. Like if you're stuck in a 4-month ship journey away from home and you want to take back enough money to retire, what else are you going to do it in?
Well, and what, going back to Columbus was looking for a way to India to get cloves and spices.
Because those are also easily transferable.
Exactly. But worth their weight in gold, basically.
More even, because they're light. They're And there's a whole thing with Columbus too. I think that we have a lot of revisionist history with Columbus, labeling him to be much worse than he really was too.
Sure.
There is a whole school of thought that make it seem like Columbus is the worst guy in history. And I just don't know that that's true.
I don't think so either.
I try.
I'm not appreciative
Right.
of any whitewashing of his legacy based on like popular media, but I mean, I think about it in the context of raised in your times and
Right.
disobeying orders, and he did.
Yeah, but I mean, like lots of good things happen from disobeying orders too.
That's true, but not
historically.
Yeah.
But that
So Cortes killed his wife, right? He's a piece of shit.
Maybe.
And like
maybe. Allegedly.
Maybe.
Strong suspicion.
She was scared to death. Right. Strong suspicion that this woman who had recently married the man who became king of an entire region of the New World.
Let's say governor.
Showed up to his
governor.
Let's say governor. Let's say governor, right?
Governor.
Showed up to his new establishment where he was living in a palace and met his girlfriend, who was already very pregnant with his first child, and said, "I don't like what you're doing," and she unexpectedly died of fright.
Seems likely that she was murdered.
All right,
but I just don't think we can say for sure. Because maybe he didn't even care enough to kill her. Like maybe he's just like, whatever, I don't care. Like
but
he
he
might
was
not
also
have
a
cared.
person not to take orders at this point, right?
True.
So let's not call him out, but let's just say that the ambiguity is the point of this conversation, and I appreciate that.
Right. So one thing I want to talk about.
Can't be
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, please do.
No, you go ahead.
Oh yeah. My final note was that Tom and Dominic make a point that, like, hey, if you're living in the hinterland and all this stuff was happening in your capital,
yes,
you probably didn't even know it was happening until
you just have a new overlord.
A couple, or didn't even know that until a couple hundred years later. But hey, this stuff happened way off there. I have never seen a Spaniard. There's already plantations in place. They have colonized this area. We are paying tribute to somebody. It goes up the chain of command.
Right.
It's not even literally part of our daily lives.
Right. No. The farmers and all that. I mean, smallpox started to ravage them eventually, but you're right. That's interesting to think about. Like, the Spanish were not much worse as rulers than the Aztecs. They're probably better because at least they weren't sacrificing humans.
Ritualistically.
Yeah.
Ritual.
Exactly. They were killing people, but not ritually sacrificing them, which seems better to me. I'd rather have a die with a sword in my hand than getting my heart cut out while I was beating.
Speaking of that, you saw Apocalypto, right?
No.
Matt?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
I highly recommend you watch Apocalypto.
Okay.
It's
not a hell of a movie.
It's pretty crazy.
Is it?
It's wild.
Noted. I will check it out.
I think Mel Gibson directed that.
Yeah, he did.
He did. It was his follow-up to Passion of the Christ. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So one of the things that I find interesting about what you just said, though, Matt, is like, so even the regular farmers, not the people deep in the hinterland, like the deep in the jungle, even the regular farmers probably didn't see much change in their life. The people who lived just outside of the city didn't see much change in their life from Mexico, from the Aztecs to the Spanish. Because what were they doing? They were replacing one ruling class with another.
Yeah.
And
the system of tribute remained the same. So
exactly.
They're still offering the same tribute to the same local representatives. But then at a certain point, the chain of command disconnects and reconnects with the Spaniards. That's it.
Right.
That's all that happened. Really.
So it's like you got one bad guy beating out another bad guy. There's no good guys in this story. It sucks that we lost a lot of the Aztec history, right? It sucks.
Yeah.
But if you're going to say the conquistadors were bad, then you got to say the Aztecs were bad. Or you say history is who they were. Don't judge people in history by modern standards, which is my theory. So then I don't judge, right?
Yeah.
I'm not upset that the conquistadors did what they did. They were people. They were people who were trying to make a better life for themselves. And that was the way they had to do it. And that sucks. But that's it. Just like the Aztecs were trying to survive because they thought they needed to sacrifice humans to keep the sun rising.
Yeah.
That's literally what their religion was.
Or
if we don't sacrifice a human, the blood doesn't flow and the sun doesn't rise.
You have raised a good point, George. I believe it was in a previous episode where, like, let's look at that. What does it mean to really sacrifice that many people?
Right.
Are you alleviating a famine? There's a famine going on.
Sure.
Oh, we all of a sudden have to get rid of 10,000 people from our population to placate the sun god, right?
That's and then the rich people still got food.
They need to die. Yeah. What is the actual effect of that? That you have fewer people to feed.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. If there's a drought, well, we got to sacrifice, and then we don't need as many crops.
Right. And there's less people to feed.
But that's the evolutionary pressure that lets that evolve, is the way I look at that. But that doesn't change the fact that there are people who are like, well, we got to sacrifice these people. Yeah. We got to cut their hearts out.
They're administrators. Like, religious people have always been administrators of our societies, and breaking down the ways in which they exert that control or the motivations by which they do so are very important, I think, to understanding and gaining self-independence.
Makes me wonder, what they do? Did they sacrifice more people during the winter solstice? Or?
I don't know. It wasn't. I don't think it was that kind of. Their cycles were built different things.
I was just curious.
They had their fighting season. They had their rainy season. They had their seasons, and they had their holidays. I don't know if it was tied to the solstice or anything like that. I don't know.
Sacrifice more people. It's winter.
Right. It was.
They are closer to the equator, though.
So right. So one thing I wanted to bring up, and I think I've talked about this on another podcast. Well, I know I have. But they've recently, as in like the last 30 years, found beads in Alaska, in some ruins, that were created in Venice in the 1490s or the 1400s. And they found them in stuff that can be dated to pre-Columbus.
Sure.
So we think of North and South America as having no contact with the old world. Yet, Russia, Siberia, is like a 30-mile boat ride, unless some of the islands are less. You could island hop, and at certain times of year, you could walk. Yep. You could walk.
Because the land bridge.
So there was contact between the old world and the new world, but it was limited to the far north. But these beads made it their way from Venice through Siberia and over to Alaska before Columbus ever got here.
That makes sense.
I mean, it's fascinating to think about that, though.
Well, if you traded, so you know what? How old do they date the beads? Or they have no idea.
The beads were made in a certain factory. They can trace it to a specific factory in Venice in the 1400s. And they can verify that they were in Alaska based on where they were found. And this was in multiple different places now, in multiple different ruins. They can verify that they were found. They were in Alaska before Columbus made it to Hispaniola.
Okay. Well, that just means the Chinese or the Russians or
they traded with the Italians, and it worked its way all the way up to the far north of Siberia.
Yep.
And over there. But think about what that really means. Does that mean that if Columbus never left, if people never made it that far, would it have been the East that ended up making that contact more? Because to them, those were just the people on the next island over.
Yeah.
Right. But what about the disease coming from that way? What about that?
I can't answer that.
I mean, it's just a fascinating thing to think about historically.
What if the bubonic plague made it over to the Americas before smallpox did? Because it was coming from China.
How different that would have been, right? Think about how different that would have been.
Sure.
If the Americas had been ravaged by disease even 100 or 200 years earlier, their population would have time to rebound by the time the Europeans got over here.
Sure.
And then this is probably not a manifest destiny thing, right? There's probably still a lot of countries here that are not in North America, even we're not just the United States of America and Canada and Mexico. It'd probably be a bunch of shit.
Yeah, but they also found villages in Canada, like in Nova Scotia and other places that had like Norse. They were like Norse villages.
Well, yes.
So
right, and that was from about 10,000 around there. They had a couple of the Vikings made a couple of trips over.
So what if
and they did a little trading? Yeah, it's another fascinating thing. But see, those people, it was a very small amount.
Sure.
And it was probably pretty cold. And that's probably the same thing with Siberia. Everybody was layered up. Disease doesn't travel near as much in the cold. That's why tropical areas have much more rampant disease in the first place.
Sure.
Right? That's probably why it never made the jump in Siberia.
But what if Columbus got to the United States or got to?
There was a bunch of Vikings.
There's a bunch of everybody was a Viking.
Or
everybody was a Viking.
half of the New World was Russian or Chinese.
Yeah.
And the other half was Vikings. And they were warring in the middle.
How crazy with that?
They were warring in the middle. The Mongols were fighting the Vikings
Yeah.
in the middle of the United States, what is now the United States.
Well, actually, the Mongols wouldn't have done that. They wouldn't have done that because they wouldn't have been able to fight too well in the Rockies.
Well,
so they would have had to get to the other side.
They had
to
to
the
figure
plains.
that shit out.
They had to get to the other side of the
They
plains.
figured all that stuff out. They hired locals. That's what I'm saying. Like, what if that's who was in charge?
Matt, you want to weigh in?
Isn't that fascinating to think about, Matt?
Oh my God, yeah, it really is. And the whole thing about disease opening the way for the Western colonization of America is a huge factor. I love that you talked about it. There's two instances that I can recall in which you've done so, and I just like to imagine what it would have been like had the smallpox not paved the way. I actually have something that I wrote that I can kind of speak to on this subject.
Sure.
Is that okay if I just
Sure.
from it? Okay. The most destructive function of a foreign contaminant, such as a disease, when introduced into a system, is not that of the result produced in a contaminated individual. As an epidemic or pandemic entity, a disease is a destroyer of societies and even entire civilizations. This we saw in the accidental genocide preceding the conquest of the Americas by Columbus and his successors. 80 to 90% of all Aboriginal people were killed by disease, erasing ancient cultures along with untold sociological history and wisdom. A tide of death that swept out before the conquerors, unseen, unchallengeable, requiring no energy or expenditure of resources
Right.
to inflict its destruction. A microscopic germ was the agent that opened the gates of the castle for these invaders, clearing the path for a seemingly easy occupation. The necessity of replacing these Aboriginal victims with human resources that were resistant to such diseases led to the intercontinental transplantation of cultures, developing new societies whose permutations remain significant in the world today. Given the nature of the contaminant and the dearth of scientific knowledge at the time, this cataclysm would have occurred even if the newcomers to the shores of these primeval lands had arrived seeking only peaceful coexistence.
For sure.
No, you nailed it. And the thing that I always think about like this is nature abhors a vacuum. If these lands were full, like when the English people got to the coast of North America, and these lands were full, it wouldn't have been a flood to get over here.
Yeah.
Those people saw the empty land as an opportunity to not be under the thumb, to not be poor, to not be serfs. How can you blame them?
Yeah.
How can you blame them for that? You can't. But if there were already people here it was full, the sign would have said no vacancy, and they would have been trade.
Yeah.
There probably would have been war too.
Sure.
But there would have been much more trade.
Like Japan.
Like Japan.
Like Japan, yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Or India.
Resistant but somewhat complicit with a resistance to the religion.
And you look at the way the British conquered India, right? They ruled India, but they didn't replace it with English people.
Yeah.
But nature abhors a vacuum. Humans are going to go where there's empty land. That having that frontier, having that open space, because it was open. To think about the way the Native American tribes after the disease were using that space, it was much less, to a farmer, it would feel like they weren't using it at all. If you're traveling around over these huge swaths of territory hunting the buffalo, to most farmers, that's going to look like you're not using 90% of the land.
Sure.
And that means that they can use it and they can make a living.
But then look at the buffalo population because there was nobody around to hunt them.
Right. The buffalo exploded. And then the Native Americans stopped doing agriculture because it's like, well, shit, why should we bother? We could just go shoot buffalo. No, Matt, that's for sure staying in.
That's
so
hilarious.
now you guys just saw Matt flex. Cut out another 15 minutes of rambling.
And we know Matt's wearing pants this time.
That is a plus. We appreciate that, Matt. Thank you.
Very rare
All right, guys.
instance of Matt wearing
All right.
pants on this podcast.
I just want to say the next episode we got coming out is going to be a little bit different. It's going to be a little bit more of a current events theme. Also, I was thinking about this, Matt and Scott. I'm going to just break it to you while we're on the live.
You're fired.
I'm going to start putting our topic ahead of time into the Discord channel and letting people throw out questions.
Please do.
Right?
That'll work.
I'm like, why? Great. I thought about that today. I'm like, why didn't I just do that for this? Like, if people got questions they want to throw out there, like I listened to that episode. Here's what I thought about that.
So crowdsource,
yeah, a little
questions.
bit, right?
Yeah, sure.
Questions or ideas or theories or any of that.
If anybody throws any out.
Yeah.
Hell
I mean,
yeah.
I think Simple Jack might.
Sunflower might.
Sunflower might. And hey, anybody else who's listening, please do. That's what we're going to do. So the next topic is going to be listed on the Talking Hardcore channel in the Hardcore History Discord, which there's a link in the description. If you're listening to this, check that out. Matt started that Discord channel years ago, and it's awesome. Great place to meet people and talk to people who love history, and especially hardcore history. You can check out talkinghardcore.com for more links to our stuff. Also, we want to say thanks again to our presenting sponsor, Ace Industrial Solutions. Ace is a good dude.
No, he's not.
Check out the link in the description for his website.
Nobody likes Ace.
Well, I like Ace better than you.
That's fair.
Yeah. So check out the link in the description for more information about Ace Industrial Solutions. If you can support them, we'd really appreciate it. Promo code to use is Scott Sucks. So when you call Ace, you just say, I have a promo code, and it's Scott Sucks.
That'll work.
Then he'll know that Ace will know that you listen to the podcast.
What?
We appreciate that.
What do they get?
They get the best service that Ace will get.
Is it 10 or 20%?
It's 10% off.
It's 10%?
Yeah, Ace said he'd do 10% off for all your solutions to your industry needs. That's what Ace does. So thank you guys for listening. I hope this wasn't too rambly, but we had a lot of fun. Matt, thanks again for joining us. This was a blast. Great topic. We're going to talk about some current event stuff next time, and we're going to get back to you then. See you then.
Sounds good. Have a nice night. Day.
Thanks.